recording. There it is.
Good to go.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 16th special meeting. Tonight we have a budget development review presentation, and we'll go ahead and start by taking the roll call. Jamie.
President Mason.
Present.
Vice President Lassane.
Present.
Director Berg.
Present.
Director Mitchell.
Present.
Director Nichols.
Present.
Thank you. And Dr. Salzman, would you like to give an overview of tonight's presentation before we get started?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Board of Directors, and thank you to our public this evening. Tonight's adoption agenda, this afternoon's agenda contains a segment for board to receive the budget review update. Mr. Moore has a family commitment that he must attend to this evening, so Ms. Ruth Floyd will be doing the presentation.
Thank you for that update. Is there any discussion regarding the agenda? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and approve it by general consent. Okay, hearing none, we will go ahead and move forward, which takes us to section 4.0 of our agenda, which is our work study session. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Floyd. Thank you for stepping in tonight.
Of course. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your time on this sunny afternoon. It's a beautiful day out there. Hopefully we can enjoy it here after a budget development review. Today, I'll review the budget development progress, take an opportunity to thank our FAC members, update legislative fixes at the state, provide an overview of federal relief funding, review factors that improved our fiscal outlook, and provide a quick update on ASB budget process. Our annual cycle is on track for a July 1 first reading. Last fall, we had told you we expected a $6 to $10 million cut for the 21-22 fiscal year. That has been mitigated through improved state revenues and legislative progress, as well as remote learning and other savings, as well as federal relief funding. Our budget development is more streamlined this year because the mitigated cuts have postponed more difficult program impacts. Legislative session is expected to end on time, which is April 25th. Contingencies will be added to the budget in anticipation of the latest round of federal recovery funds that were very recently signed into law. Our budget development is milestones are outlined here. It's a reverse timeline culminating with a draft budget available to the public on July 10.
Hey, Ruth, excuse
yes?
me for interrupting. We don't have a presentation up on our screen.
Oh, I apologize.
That's okay. I was looking at it on my iPad on the side, so I was kind of just following along and then realized maybe other people wanted to follow along too.
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms.
I thought I had this. Windows. Do you have it now?
Yes.
Okay. Would you like me to repeat anything?
I think, maybe just back up one slide. Yeah, to that one. And
okay, sounds good.
Much but just so they can see the visual there.
Sure. So this just displays our annual cycle for the budget, culminating in a preliminary budget to you on July 1st. And then the adoption would be on August 24th. And at the beginning in the fall, we had thought that it would be more like $6 to $10 million in cuts, but that has been mitigated through different improved state revenue forecasts, as well as legislative progress, resource management savings, and President Biden's most recent relief package. Our budget development efforts to mitigate cuts have averted some more of the difficult program impacts that we thought may occur. All indications, though, show that the legislative session will end on April 25th. And because there are additional federal funds coming due to the most recent federal package, we'll add in some contingencies, additional contingencies to the budget to make sure that we have both the revenues and expenditures accounted for in the budget. And budget development milestones include in a reverse timeline, draft budget available to the public by July 10th. And we need to identify some contingencies as discussed by early May. And ESSER 2 funds that weren't spent this year will also be included in next year's budget, as well as the most recent relief package and any strategic plan initiatives will be added also mid-May. And then the baseline budget will assume in-person learning next year. We have had 3 meetings so far with the Fiscal Advisory Council. The December 7th meeting, we provided information on the strategic plan, the shifting fiscal outlook, the impacts of COVID, as well as legislative actions needed. In January, we provided an update on the 2021 legislative priorities and an improved fiscal outlook and enrollment overview with a group discussion on enrollment loss. In March, we reviewed with the FAC the budget development progress, updated them again on the improved fiscal outlook, reviewed legislative fixes that were going through the state legislature for enrollment, transportation, as well as levy in the coming year. There was also a group discussion at the March 8th council meeting on learning loss and social emotional supports for our students. We want to thank all of these FAC members. We appreciate their contributions and continued engagement. Our legislative bills on funding rely on the use of federal funding first. The original plan from OSPI was to receive the higher of the federal, what we call ESSER 2 funding, and the state stabilization funds to cover both enrollment and transportation funding loss. I'll go through how that's changed in a couple of slides as I go through some more of the bills that have been working their way through the legislature. But ESSER 2 is provided to districts based on the Title I formula and is very restrictive in nature. We'll call those red dollars. We're going to go through that here in a minute. Whereas stabilization funds are more flexible for covering lost revenue such as enrollment, which we're going to call green dollars in our next slide. House Bill 1368 uses ESSER 2 for enrollment loss. Districts had originally hoped it would mirror the OSPI plan, providing early access to the enrollment and transportation stabilization funding. But certain districts now need to wait until later in the session to receive state stabilization. And the table you see here illustrates how district funding varies widely from for similar sized districts. For example, Bellevue and Issaquah at the bottom there, their federal dollars are lower than the state stabilization that was estimated. But those funds, the excess funds that they would get have fewer restrictions because of their large enrollment drop. They will likely have to wait, though, to see those additional funds from the state until closer to the end of the legislative session. And then Edmonds enrollment drop was lower, but they have higher poverty, so they will receive additional federal funds, but they have more restrictions, and so that's the red dollars there you see. Everett is somewhere in the middle with about equal federal and state funding anticipated, and so we will probably receive very little state funding, because keep in mind it's the higher of the two numbers, not both added together. You can see that there is a large difference in those school districts who have high versus low poverty and high versus low enrollment loss. ESSER II funding allows districts to use it for similar items as the previous federal package, with emphasis on areas circled in green, including mental health supports and addressing learning loss. It also allows for reimbursement of existing district operations to help maintain employment of staff, which is circled there in red. There is a large emphasis on recovery, learning recovery. The regular session is set to end on April 25th, and these are some of the bills making their way through the legislature. We talked already about 1368, which provides us the ESSER II funding. And then Senate Bill 5128 was at a 70% funding for transportation, but it was amended to move a portion of the funding to a special account, $100 million to a special account that will be tapped by districts who have already used their ESSER II funds, because the bill requires that the ESSER federal funds are used first. And then there may be some sort of application process to receive the additional state stabilization funds for transportation, but it doesn't appear, 100 million doesn't appear to be enough to cover all the losses throughout the state. House Bill 1476 is the enrollment stabilization that some of those districts with lower poverty and higher enrollment losses are waiting for. And unfortunately, it will probably be near the end of session before that's determined, because it will most likely be part of the final budget conversation. And lastly, Senate Bill 5326 would have required state benefit levels at the same as what school districts provide their drivers for both medical and retirement benefits, but without any funding attached to it. But this bill appears to be dead. Federal relief funding. Everett has up to now received access to relief funding of $12.7 million. This does not include the latest American Rescue Plan funds recently signed by the Biden administration. ESSER I provided $2.6 million. It funded extra hours for staff, postage and printing, and other school supplies needed to cover COVID impacts, PPE and cleaning supplies, unemployment costs, as well as food services lost revenues. Another difference between the first round of ESSER funds and the second round is that they are not allowing for claiming of lost revenue, and so that is a change. But we did put in some lost revenue in the last round for food services. FEMA also is distributing funds to schools and other entities that have impacts from COVID. They have funded PPE and cleaning costs, as well as overtime for communications and some other departments. We have not actually received the money, but we have claimed the bulk of the FEMA funds. And we also received other federal grants that are related to the CARES Act. in the amount of about $540,000. That includes internet access for students, technology from the Governor's Relief Fund, and additional supplies for the ECAP program. ESSER II federal funding has been distributed through the grant portal, and we will submit the application and budget matrix soon. Nothing has been claimed yet, but all has been accounted for, as you can see here. We anticipate using the funds for hybrid staffing, teachers and paras in gen ed and special ed who are kept on staff in the fall, even though we had lower enrollment. COVID attestation and tracing software, athletic costs to supplement lack of ASB revenues, instructional technology facilitators, learning software, replacement computer devices, as well as additional PPE not covered by FEMA and custodians needed for the return of students, HVAC filter upgrades, and unemployment costs. This is just a summary of the counts of some of the PPE that we did. 33,000 microfiber cloths, 30,000 masks, cloth masks and surgical masks, as well as KN95 masks, face shields, all those things that we needed to keep our staff and students safe. We've already gone through the items covered by relief funding, but here's another summary. The American Rescue Plan was signed on March 11, and we anticipate approximately $22 million for Everett. At least 20% of that must be used to address learning loss. And it follows similar rules to ESSER II and but is available for a longer period of time. We can spend that money through September of 2024. There is an improved fiscal outlook, as we've been talking about, and that's due to the federal relief funding, as well as remote learning and resource management savings. The current year ending fund balance is estimated at 10.8%. with approximately 7.4% ending fund balance at the end of 21-22. 2022-23 is the final year of state regionalization cut phase down, so we anticipate additional cuts that year to maintain our 6% fund balance, as you can see there in the graph. And there has definitely been a progression of improved fiscal outlook, as you can see by the different period of time on those different lines. The yellow line was what we had anticipated in November, not knowing when return of students would be. And then in January, we updated, and now we're updating once again. Our projected savings this year through March total about $6.3 million. We've listed here the COVID monthly savings, $365,000 per month in vacancies and furloughs. The projections here anticipate that beginning to reverse in April. And then we also had additional savings on substitute costs and non-staffing costs, such as maintenance, supplies, and operating costs, also known as MSOC, distributed between the schools, the bulk of it, though, through departments, as we worked on a 10 to 15% reduction across most departments. Other included in the projections are no middle school athletics in 2021 and some staffing efficiencies and vacancies in 21-22. These are yearly numbers. The prior slide was monthly numbers, but these are yearly, and they are incorporated into the projection. A final invoice from Northwest ESD, who holds our unemployment pool, is needed to confirm unemployment costs. They once that's finalized, though, they will be covered. They should be completely covered by federal ESSER funds. Transportation savings are over $4.3 million, but they're not included in the prior savings estimates. They don't help the bottom line of fund balance because the state recovers any excess revenues we receive. And 2021 revenues are expected to cover remaining expenses, but there is concern for 21-22 with funding based on the prior year expenditures. So without a legislative fix, there would be a great mismatch between our revenues and our expenditures in transportation for the next fiscal year. That concludes the general fund portion of the presentation remarks that I wanted to provide for you. Just briefly, though, I thought you would be interested in progress on our ASB budgeting, and students are working diligently on preparing their 21-22 ASB budgets. With a lack of history to guide them, though, because 1920 and 2021 are not good predictors. The revenues and expenditures are just much different than in prior years. And so they're going back more to 1819, which is a little bit old, you know, to try and determine what's going to happen 3 years later. The revenues are down this year because we have not assessed any ASB card fees, parking revenues, or game receipts to date. And expenditures are also down approximately by the same amount. Schools are very thankful to the board and the administration for covering some of the costs that would normally be supported by these revenues that they're not receiving this year. So I did want to pass that along to you, that they the reason that they are staying revenues about equal to expenditures is because of that help that the district has provided. Remote budgeting has been a challenge to the students and advisors because in some cases the current ASB team didn't even participate in the budget last year due to delayed elections. You'll remember that in March is probably about the time when they're starting to get going with their budget, and so it kind of went sideways on them a little bit. The learning curve is steep for the current officers, but they're doing a great job. Board presentations in May will highlight their accomplishments in a remote world. The budgets will assume students are back in school in person, similar to the general fund budget. And House Bill 1660 was enacted last year. It is also giving the students some challenges in determining where their revenues are going to be for next year. So House Bill 1660 was enacted in the prior legislative session to give more students, and even some families free access to ASB cards and activities that the schools do. And for obvious reasons, it creates its own set of challenges for budgeting. And although the bill is well intended, it does have some unintended consequences. To cover less revenue, they may need to require more fundraising. They may need to change their fee schedule and or reduce their activities and services. And so if you think about raising the fees, that may create an additional number of students who don't want to participate, which further lowers revenue. If you lower the fees, then that is lower revenue. So it's a little bit of a spiral effect when you think about the effects, the effects of what they can do to mitigate some of the revenue losses. But they're working through it, and we will be keeping an eye, of course, on the ASB budget as we both approve it this spring as well as during the year next year, to make sure that their fund balances aren't affected too much. All right, so just a couple of key summary points. We talked about the budget development being on track for a July 1 first reading. The AFAC has been actively engaged in the budget development process. We have much needed legislative bills going through the process. We have aggressive resource management that has helped our fund balance stay higher this year, and that helps to alleviate some of the reduction in fund balance next year as well as the year following. Cost savings and federal relief help to avoid deeper 21-22 cuts. And we are on track for an ASB budget and board review of their presentations on May 11th. Again, April 25th is the end of the regular legislative session. We tentatively have another FAC meeting scheduled for May 3rd. ASB will present on May 11th, and then after the July 1 first reading, we anticipate adoption of the complete budget, including all 5 funds, on August 24th. Thank you all. I'm available for any questions. I know this has been a different format than in past years, but we felt that it was more of an update to let you know that things have been progressing well on the budget front, and we wanted to provide you with an update and an opportunity to ask questions. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you in particular for stepping in tonight and providing this overview to us. I know you know this information like the back of your hand, but really appreciate you being here with us to answer questions and give us the information.
Of course.
Go ahead.
No, I just said, of course, thank you. I'm happy to do it.
Perhaps we can go ahead and close the presentation down.
Sure.
And directors, I'm going to open it up for questions or comments. Director Mitchell.
I do have a question with the federal funds, if I may ask, Ruth, and it's regarding the ESSER funds 1 and 2. Do we essentially have a period of time in which we have to utilize those before we can move on to the ESSER Plan 3 funds, or can they all be used at the same time through September 2024?
There is no nothing in law that I'm aware of that says that we have to use them consecutively. I believe that we are able to tap them all at the same time. However, the timing of when we have to spend the money is consecutive. And so ESSER 1, we have to spend the money by the end of next year, I believe, or could even be September of this year. And then ESSER 2 is the end of next fiscal year, and then ESSER 3 is 2024. So it makes the most sense to spend the money, you know, first in, first out.
All right. I have a question about the ASB funds and that House bill.
Yes.
Okay, so the ASB is self-funded, right, for each school?
Yes.
And so does the House bill not have a fiscal note? Is that where the concern comes from?
The concern is that the bill talks about providing the additional benefit to free and reduced price lunch students and some of their families. And so I'm not sure if there was a fiscal note that provided all of the implications of that.
Yeah, because that's in that I appreciate the fact that the House wants to do that. We've talked about that for years. How can we eliminate the fees for a lot of our things? But I guess my question is, can the general funds be used for ASB losses, or are general funds restricted so that, if the district could help pay for those low-income students, that might be what the state is thinking, versus, those who can paying for those who can't, which is what happens oftentimes. But that, like you said, if fees raise, or if somebody thinks that they're having to pay and somebody else hasn't, again, there is a lot of issue there versus, nobody's talking about it. If it comes from the general fund, it's just like free and reduced lunch. It's getting paid for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are different areas that could help support, and general fund is one of them. The opposite isn't true. ASB can't support general fund expenditures, but general fund can support ASB expenditures. It's just a matter of working that into the budget line, because at this point we have not made that determination that general fund will support any ASB losses due to this bill.
Okay, because then that's where it is. I mean, those who we can support, it would be great, and if we could support all, it would be great. So thank you so much.
And a general fund is already supporting, the advisor stipends and a lot of the transportation too. So, so that they already are providing benefits to the AAs.
Yeah, but it is a lot of those fees that create a barrier to access, and that can create a barrier to access free and reduced lunch as well as non-free and reduced lunch. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't quite catch. So was there funding attached to that bill or not?
There was not.
Okay, so the thing that's just frustrating is that higher poverty schools are going to need more funding to help cover those costs, and higher poverty schools often have a more difficult time raising funds. So it's kind of a double whammy for
schools.
In the past, Ruth, have we not eliminated some of the pay-to-play activities in our ASB so that the general fund has supported that effort?
Currently there are athletic fees charged at the secondary level. We have not made the determination to stop charging those. We did this year because of the unique circumstances of the year, but at this time the athletic fees are currently expected to continue. ASB cards have always been a requirement with a fee if you're going to participate in an ASB activity. So general fund has not helped on that front either.
We've never in the past used general fund to eliminate some of the pay-to-play fees.
I can't say never. The one that's sticking out in my mind right now is the athletic fees, and currently we don't supplement that other than the costs associated with the transportation. So the pay to play fees for athletics is offset by the expenditures.
If I might just add it, I'll get with staff to make sure that no child is deprived of anything this time. I'll get with Ruth. Awesome presentation, by the way, but this is also new to me during these times. So I promise you I'll get with staff the next few weeks, and we don't want any child not to have the accessible needs that they need.
Well,
Right.
can I just clarify, Director Listain, you're talking about waiving for specific students, not eliminating. Yeah, we waive. We do
Yeah.
waive.
We already
athletic
do that.
fees. Yes.
Okay, because I was under the impression we had eliminated some pay-to-play fees for certain students that required activities. And so this is one of the reasons why I asked the question. We have in the past eliminated any costs associated with pay-to-play, and it was fees, but it could be, ASB card is a fee as well. So
Yes,
asked
I'm
that
sorry, I
question.
misunderstood your original question, but yes, for free and reduced, if they overtly request to be to have that benefit, then yes, we have for those students provided free access, but we have gone to other sources. It's been few enough that we've gone to other sources to obtain help in covering those lost revenues. In this case, the district needs to overtly ask the parents to release the information, and so we expect that will be a much larger number of people who will take advantage of the free access. And then there is also some family members as well have the ability to gain access to athletic events and other events as well. So it will have a larger impact on ASB revenues.
Director Berg, I saw your hand up. Did you want to make a comment?
I did, and I wanted to just make a comment and also clarify a couple of things because I'm just looking at the slide. Sorry, I pulled it up on a different screen on number 20, slide number 28, and I'm just. So I guess what's not sitting well with me is that first off, 1660, that bill, the whole point was to get rid of the opportunity gap. And so I feel like when I just read that slide, it like the way I interpret it is that since we have, basically, impoverished kids, our ASBs are going to potentially have to suffer in some way financially because we have to pay for kids who can't, it almost reads as if we're giving away free ASB cards or like the legislature mandated that. But I think stepping back from it, the whole point of 1660, and Dr. Saltzman can look into this with Ruth and Jeff, was to get data on the opportunity gap, right? To say how many kids are suffering because of things like Director Lassim said, not being able to participate in activities. And in the past, we, because of their income, have waived that, which is all well and good. But the question just becomes that we know that gap is widening and there are ways to help with it. In addition to that, 1660 also provide OSPI has a grant. So districts can apply for grant money to help, again, with that data from that opportunity cap. But when I read the slide, I just feel like our ASBs are being saddled with having to give free cards to, these poor students and that's literally not what that is. And I'm actually struggling without seeing the data on what the opportunity gap is to understand what they're struggling with. So our ASBs seeing some data that we as a board are not, because the only way for them to struggle is if an adult has told them that they're struggling, or if there's some assumption or implication that they're making based on I'm not sure what, if it's not data. So I guess I would just like to, hopefully our students aren't seeing this messaging, because if I'm an ASB president, I'm looking at my free and reduced lunch peers who, unfortunately, most students know who they are, looking at them going, you guys are the reason that we're not going to be able to have a nice prom because we're going to pay for you guys to get your ASB cards. And that's like literally not the mindset we need to go into this with. So I'm struggling to even know how this is a problem if we don't have the data to back it up. So there's that piece of it. So I guess, can I ask that we get the opportunity gap data that the bill actually calls for so that we can figure out what the number is, and then we can figure out if we have a problem, and then we can figure out if they're struggling.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Okay, that would be
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, because I do know that we have in the past, I thought we had in the past, reduced the requirement for pay to play. If there was a reason associated with why a student could not play, we did not want any child left behind as a result of that or not be allowed to play. And I look at this as in the same category. Free ASB cards. I agree with Director Byrd. I would hate to have our ASB officers see this and point out to a student that you're the reason why we can't, because then that just builds another resentment, another level of resentment toward students that it shouldn't exist. It just should not exist.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. And also the parent or the family that says, "Wait, we have to pay more so that some can pay nothing."
Yes,
we have to make everything be sort of transparent and invisible at the same time.
Exactly, and I think we would want to support every child that's in that category.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Up here is to get the data that Director Berg mentioned, and it sounds like Director Saltzman and Ruth, and I'm sure Jeff will follow up on that, and we will see something in a Friday report.
Thank you.
Are there other questions on the budget? Director
I-
Nichols, or?
I'm just, I think everybody's touched on the concerns I had thus far. My only question, and it's probably answering my own question, is I didn't see any of these budget considerations. I didn't see any talk about staffing, and I know sometimes we've talked about those in conjunction. But it sounds like just because of these new financial projections, that we're not going to have to worry about reductions of staffing due to budget. Is that correct?
There are no reductions of current staff. We have tightened up some of the secondary class sizes in order to, through attrition, to have some savings there.
Okay.
That's great. I just wanted to know the expanded fiscal advisory council and the number of community members on there that are participating, and thank Dr. Salzman for making that happen on several of our councils. And I know Director Berg was also instrumental in making sure that was an expanded group for all our advisory groups, I think. I did have a question about, so we have not yet received any of the ARP funds or the ESSER3 funding. Is that included in the budget that we saw tonight, or because we haven't received it and it hasn't been determined exactly how much are we just still waiting on that?
We are waiting on that. It includes some of those funds. It kind of took pressure off of our ending fund balance in the following year to take up and for example, custodians that are needed to provide the classroom needs when students start returning. Those could be put to, say, an ESSER3 or a recovery, the newest recovery money. Whereas without that money, it would go to general fund, state revenues, and it would lower the fund balance. But for the most part, it is unaccounted for. And so we'll need to identify the learning loss needs, the social emotional needs, and those other items that will help bring our students back.
So when I look at slide 23, there's none of that funding in there. But what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that those funds, the ESSER3 funds, which are actually quite significant, they're almost double what we got the first.
Yes, they are.
Is going to be spent on things like learning loss and expenses that we believe we will have due to recovery from the pandemic, that will then offset the expenses of those, so that the overall budget picture is going to remain relatively the same.
Yes.
Is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll have contingency in the budget on the revenues and the expenditure side which will maintain those fund balances at approximately the same levels.
Okay. And then I just have another request on the fund balance. I'm looking at the 10.8 there, and I know we've had slightly higher. Can we have a follow-up on what our fund balance has been for the last, say, like 5 years? I'm just kind of curious where, sort of what that over history has looked like.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
May I ask one more question? I hate to bother, and this might not be in a total budget consideration. It may be with Mike Gunn's purview. But when we start thinking about returning students, will there be a need for additional portables to maintain social distances and have classes back in session? Will there be a need for purchase of more equipment, like additional ventilation systems or things along those lines. And have we considered that if we were to get 85% of our students say they want to be back in class, yet we still have to maintain a certain distance, for each student in a classroom, how are we going to achieve that?
So we pay a lot of attention to capacities and the need for facilities to house students. Right now, with the 6 foot of physical distancing, our capacities are around 50 to 60% of normal. With once we are able to shift to a 3 foot of distancing, we expect our capacities to be up at basically full capacity. So we have not made plans to buy portables at this point to respond to physical distancing due to COVID. We have been purchasing and installing additional MERV, what are called MERV 13 filters in our mechanical systems, and doing adjustments and repairs and upgrades to our systems to provide better, healthier airflow and filtering of our air in our systems. A lot of those costs have been covered through the federal funds that we've been discussing.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was a good question. Thank you for that. And I know there's a lot of discussion going on right now at the national level about moving to a 3 foot social distance. And several states have already gone there. So we might see some momentum gain there to allow us some more flexibility come fall. Are there additional questions on the budget? Anything else that Ruth can follow up on or answer for us? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head shakes. So at this point in time, we'll say thank you very much to Ms. Floyd for being here, answering all our questions. Appreciate
Thank you.
And we do have tonight, before we go, an executive session to discuss pending litigation. The anticipated length of time is 15 minutes and no action will be taken. So I'd like to say thank you to the rest of you for being here with us tonight. Great to see you, and go enjoy the sunny evening.
So Caroline, are we staying on the same Zoom or do we have a separate Zoom?
I believe we're staying on and everyone else is falling off, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
I actually got a different link, and so did our outside counsel. So maybe Jamie could clarify that, because
I thought we were going to a different
I thought we were
link.
going on to a separate link.
I think
I'm recording as well.
but
We do have to go to a separate link.
Yep, we have to leave and come back.
So you got that
Oh,
second
yeah,
link in
yeah,
that
I see that.
email?
It's in the email.
the
Yeah,
same email. I didn't scroll down. So is it in the same one that we?
yeah, it's in the same email, lower down.
Oh, it is the same one. Look at that.
Okay.
Okay.
Goodbye, everyone, for 2
Bye.
minutes.
And Jamie, were you able to get a hold of Pat?
I did. She's in there now.
Okay, great.
She's in the meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks.
Hi. Is anyone there still?
Yes. Hello.
Sorry, Jamie.
That's all right. We need an official adjournment.
This meeting is hereby adjourned.